Marvel Comics fans of Miguel O'Hara Spider-Man 2099 are likely to be very excited about this week's news. The character is returning, or at least we're returning to his universe, as I believe the timeline has been sorted out after Nick Spencer's Spider-Man 2099 story arc that happened a couple of years ago. Fans of the Winter Soldier, perhaps not. We're actually getting a new Winter Soldier introduced in this timeline. Obviously, this is celebrating the 30th anniversary of the series, and I will get into those details shortly, but there's something that I think people will be more interested in. At least I'm interested in. This is something we've been talking about not only at Marvel Comics, with DC Comics. It's mantle swaps, gender swaps, race swaps, sexuality swaps. So, of course, we are getting a new Winter Soldier and supposedly some new X-Men characters, but those haven't been named yet. So we're going to talk about this first. The next chapter of Spider-Man 2099 will introduce a new version of the Winter Soldier, debuting in Spider-Man 2099 Exodus #1. The Winter Soldier of 2099, also known as Winter Soldier 13, was salvaged from the black market. As a child and raised on mad science, according to the House of Ideas, seeking vengeance and rebirth, she will clash with the mysterious Cabal as she chases a new power after a Celestial falls to Earth. Who asked for this? Why do they keep giving these things that nobody wants? You're doing with this with every single character. The Winter Soldier's got a pretty distinct origin. It's not exactly like that's a superhero moniker. Bucky Barnes was a trained assassin after he got lost. Came back to torment Steve Rogers and try to kill him and all kinds of stuff. Now, obviously, he did get turned back to good. This is a weird call sign associated with a very specific program where Bucky Barnes was forced to murder people left and right. Why do they continuously do this? And why every time they have to do it? And it's not shocking that this is a Steve Orlando comic. Why does the character all of a sudden have to be a 90-pound female with some stupid pink haircut? It's the same thing over and over and over and over. At least when you introduced the Winter Soldier, yeah, it was Bucky Barnes, but it was like a Bucky Barnes no one had ever seen before. There's some uniqueness to that story. Now, some people would say it's very similar to the Red Hood. Who came up with the idea first? Was it Ed Brubaker? Was it Judd Winnick? That's a debate for another day, but at least there was some type of originality for Marvel Comics here. You can only go to the well so many times before the gimmick or the hook is no longer effective. And we're well past that. We've essentially worn out the old man universe. Now we're going to wear out the Marvel 2099 universe by stepping into it too many times. They've had to reboot it a couple times already. It's a cool concept. Just let Miguel O'Hara be the Spider-Man in 2099. Yeah, I have a couple of different versions of characters here and there. Or how about new heroes that we've never seen before? Maybe archetypes we've seen, but new names, new costumes. And that way you don't have to turn every single comic book fan against you by continuously ruining their favorite character with these stupid-ass mantle swap. No one asked for Winter Soldier 13. Nobody wants this crap. Yeah, there's going to be like 14 people on Twitter be like, yeah, go girl. They don't read comic books anyway. And even if they do, it's 13 people. Come on. Like, I'm tired of talking about it here. Am I going to stop talking about it? Ooh, hey, Wes, if you're tired of talking about it, stop talking about it. I'm not going to stop talking about it. Are you kidding me? I am pointing a spotlight on an enormous issue with the entire comic book universe. We're about to get an entire event of it from DC Comics called Dark Crisis. We've taken this idea of mantle swaps and race swaps and gender swaps and sexuality swaps a little too far now, don't you think? Otherwise, I think a lot of people will be interested in this Spider-Man 29 return to a character that a lot of people like. A lot of people like Miguel O'Hara, essentially Marvel's version of Terry McGinnis, Batman Beyond. Let's get into the rest of the details. Spider-Man 2099 is written by Steve Orlando and illustrated by Paul Fry, David Walker, Marco Castillo, Z. Carlos, Alessandro Mercallo, and Kim Jacinto. Slated for May, the first issue of Spider-Man 2099 Exodus Alpha #1. The series plot kicks off with the Celestial falling to Earth and bringing with it the chance for a real change to the dystopian reality of 2099. This then causes Miguel O'Hara Spider-Man 2099 to journey across the universe. The series also promises to introduce new versions of Loki and members of the X-Men. That is a lot of comic book artists for one 3-issue story arc. Now, it did mention that he's going to be traveling the universe. Perhaps they have an artist for every universe that Miguel O'Hara eventually ends up in. Obviously, David Walker would be the biggest name in there. The real problem is Steve Orlando, let's be honest. I know he does have some fans, but he's not a big name. He's not specifically skilled, and he's never really written a hit comic book in his life. Sure, you can put a Steve Orlando name on a Batman comic, and it'll sell like 30% less than a normal Batman comic, which is better than a lot of others. But for a Batman comic, it sucks. And that's just who he is. He is a shitty comic book writer. At this point, there's nothing that DC or Marvel can do to change that. They have tried to make Steve Orlando a thing. They've tried over and over and over, just like these gender and race swaps and all that stuff, and it's never going to happen. Steve Orlando is never going to be a superstar in the comic book industry. He's just not talented enough. In fact, he's probably not talented enough to work at Marvel or DC. When you think about the history of the publishers, the universes, and the characters, they probably shouldn't put any writer as shitty as Steve Orlando on any of these characters, even Spider-Man 99, which will likely never make it to a movie. Steve Orlando is gay Tim Seeley. That's all I got to say about that. The real problem lies within this. The creator of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, is Peter David. He's working at Marvel at this moment. In fact, if you were to name the 3 best writers that working currently at Marvel, I would say it's Peter David, Chip Zdarsky, and probably still Donny Cates, although he's falling off quickly. Peter David is one of the best writers Marvel has in their entire bullpen. There's nobody that's going to deliver a better Spider-Man 2099 series than Peter David. He literally just did this 5 or 6 years ago. Why not just put him on the book? You're celebrating his creation from 30 years ago. He's an active writer. He's doing kick-ass work left and right. Why not celebrate it with the person that you're actually celebrating? Sure, you're celebrating the character, but you're also celebrating the creator. Why celebrate it with Steve Orlando? Do you think Peter David wouldn't like the paying gig? Do you think Peter David doesn't have another Miguel O'Hara story, 3-issue story to tell? What an absolute embarrassment for Marvel Comics and their editorial staff. And I'm throwing this on Nick Lowe. He's the Spider-Man group editor. How do you mess this one up? Put Peter David on the goddamn book. Marvel Comics have provided a synopsis for Spider-Man 2099, Exodus, and here's how it goes. After fighting battles across the time stream, Miguel O'Hara is at last back defending his present and the world's future. For Spider-Man 2099, the only thing constant about life in Nueva York is change. So when a cataclysmic crash creates a new Garden of Eden in what was once America's wastelands, Spider-Man knows exactly what the next atrocity will be. Watch as the mysterious group known as the Cabal plans to set society ablaze and find out which Marvel villain is leading them in Spider-Man 2099, Exodus Alpha number 1. Great. We got mentions of the Garden of Eden, atrocities. I wonder where they're taking this one. I wonder who the big bad villains are going to be. It's going to have some type of tie-in to Christians. Marvel, for some reason, absolutely hates Christians. If you're a Christian like myself, it's tough being a Marvel fan when you know that, like, I imagine there's a lot of creators, probably even editors or whatever, but for some reason, the publisher just really pushes a lot of hate towards Christians these days. We even have Nightcrawler essentially giving up his faith. When's the last time that Daredevil even mentioned his faith? There are only a handful of mainstream superheroes, in North American comics that even seem like they're practicing Christians, and we're losing them day by day. But every time you see Christians in Marvel Comics, they're inevitably evil, and they are going to murder a bunch of people. And I'm not surprised Steve Orlando's on the book. Speaking of Steve Orlando, this is what he had to say. We got a quote. Roving the spinner racks and trading cards of the early 1990s, the world of 2099 was my first future dystopia. Its neon-haunted visions of Marvel's future close to my heart, and at the forefront of that future, fighting as anyone with his name always has, for the everyday folk of the future, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. So here, decades later, celebrating the 30th anniversary of 2099, is a dream come true. And there was never any question who'd be the face of this celebration. Your friendly, futuristic Spider-Man. And for Miguel, this fight is bigger than ever, since it's his first time going toe-to-toe with one of Spider-Man's greatest villains. Let's make history together in Spider-Man 2099 Exodus and lead the people of 2099 into a new tomorrow. How far has Marvel Comics fallen, where Steve Orlando, the writer of Spider-Man 2099 Exodus, has to ensure people that Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099 himself, will actually star in the book. Marvel and DC fans have been bait and switched so many times where you're told that this is what you're going to get, and then something else comes in there, and he has to say, listen, we're not going to do it this time. If you want a 2099 story, you're going to get Miguel O'Hara. That tells you everything you need to know kind of about the state of Marvel Comics right now. I know a lot of fans of Miguel O'Hara are going to be very excited for this. I expect nothing memorable to come out of it. Steve Orlando hasn't delivered a good comic book in quite some time. He has been an atrocious fit at Marvel Comics themselves. Enjoy the character while you can. He's only going to be back for 3 issues, but you are going to get a new version of the Winter Soldier. Makes no sense whatsoever. Sounds like we're getting new versions of some X-Men as well. We're also going to get a new Loki, but he appears to look pretty similar to the old Loki. It's too bad. Peter David, this is his spot. This is his book. It's really his celebration. You're celebrating his creation, and he's still active. He's not just active. He's kicking ass and taking names. I just feel like Marvel probably dropped the ball on this, but I do hope all the Miguel O'Hara fans out there and the Spider-Man 2099 fans out there get a comic book that they really enjoy. I just happen to have doubts that Steve Orlando is even capable of delivering that. DC Comics are in the middle of a very bad publicity cycle, but it hasn't been all great for Marvel either. If you haven't seen this video, Marvel went in and their editorial staff actually changed Greg Smallwood's art. They didn't like his depictions of Asians, and they made it so much worse. You got to see this to believe it.